The first time the police realized they were hunting someone extraordinary was not when the bodies appeared, but when the bodies refused to behave the way bodies were supposed to. There were no fingerprints, no DNA that could be traced with confidence, no predictable pattern of location, timing, or victim profile. It was as if the killer understood not only how crimes were solved, but how investigators thought, and stayed 3 steps ahead of them. Colorado had seen its share of violent criminals, but this was different. This was quiet, surgical, intelligent. The first victim was discovered on a cold autumn morning outside Fort Collins. A middle-aged man, found in his own garage, seated calmly in his car, as if he had simply turned off the engine and fallen asleep. The coroner later ruled the cause of death as carbon monoxide poisoning, but the garage door had been open. Wide open. There was no suicide note. No sign of depression. Nothing that made sense. The case was initially logged as suspicious, but inconclusive. And then, 6 weeks later, another body surfaced near Boulder. Different age. Different background. Different location. Same eerie calm. No struggle. No witnesses. No forensic trail. That was when Captain Daniel Reeves of the Colorado Major Crimes Unit stepped in. Reeves was not a loud man, nor a dramatic one. He was known for his patience, his unsettling ability to sit with a case longer than anyone else and notice what others missed. When he reviewed the files, he didn't focus on the deaths themselves. He focused on the absence of chaos. Killers made mistakes. Even professionals left something behind. But here, every scene looked curated, as if someone had erased the noise. Reeves made a quiet decision that unsettled his entire team. "These deaths are connected," he said. "And whoever did this is testing us." Over the next 8 months, 4 more people died across Colorado Springs, Pueblo, and a remote mountain town near Aspen. No 2 scenes matched. One victim drowned in a bathtub with no signs of forced entry. Another died from a rare plant toxin usually studied only in graduate-level botany programs. One death looked like an accident involving hiking equipment, but the knots used were too precise, too deliberate. The media began calling him the ghost of the Rockies. What the public didn't know was that the killer was leaving messages, not written, not spoken, but embedded in the crimes themselves. Each method of killing reflected a different academic discipline: chemistry, physics, biology, engineering. It was as if the murderer was building a resume, daring law enforcement to notice. Reeves noticed. He gathered his team and pinned photographs of the crime scenes on a wall, not by date or location, but by concept. Cause of death. Level of expertise required. Access to specialized knowledge. Slowly, a profile emerged, one that frightened even the most seasoned detectives. This wasn't rage-driven. This wasn't impulsive. This was someone with advanced education, meticulous planning skills, and a deep contempt for conventional authority. Someone who enjoyed control more than violence. And then came the mistake. The 7th victim was found in Denver, in an upscale apartment overlooking the city. The death itself followed the pattern: clean, quiet, nearly perfect. But one small detail caught Reeves' eye: a bookshelf. Among dozens of titles, one book had been placed back incorrectly, its spine misaligned by a fraction of an inch. To anyone else, it meant nothing. To Reeves, it screamed habit. He ordered a deep dive into academic libraries, online forums, and university labs across the state, who had access to rare toxins, who studied multiple disciplines, who had suddenly stopped publishing papers, teaching classes, or attending conferences around the time the killings began. Thousands of names became hundreds. Hundreds became dozens. Then one name refused to disappear. Dr. Elias Crow. A former prodigy. PhD by 26. Cross-disciplinary genius. Once praised as one of the most versatile minds in applied science. And then, silence. Fired quietly from a research institute after a sealed internal investigation. No criminal record. No public scandal. Just a man who vanished into anonymity, working freelance consulting jobs and living alone. Reeves didn't arrest him, didn't question him, didn't even let Crow know he was being watched. Instead, he did something risky. He leaked information. a fabricated detail about the next potential victim, released subtly through channels only law enforcement insiders and academic professionals would notice. A whisper, disguised as speculation. 3 days later, Crow changed his routine. He took a route to work he had never taken before. He bought supplies he hadn't purchased in years. And for the first time since the murders began, he made a visible error, using a university lab access card that had technically expired but still worked on outdated systems. Reeves smiled for the first time in months. But capturing the smartest killer in Colorado history wouldn't be as simple as knocking on a door with handcuffs. Crow had anticipated surveillance. He had contingency plans layered within contingency plans. When the police finally moved in, they found his apartment meticulously scrubbed, walls repainted, computers wiped clean. Except for one thing: a single notebook, hidden inside the hollow base of a desk leg. Inside were no confessions, no names, no timelines. Just equations, diagrams, and short handwritten sentences, philosophical observations about control, intelligence, and the inevitability of being misunderstood. The final page contained only one line: "They will never prove it." Reeves knew then that the real battle was just beginning, because catching a genius wasn't the same as holding one. And Elias Crow, sitting calmly in the interrogation room hours later, looked less like a man who had lost and more like a man who had been waiting for this moment all along. He leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and said almost politely, "Captain Reeves, may I ask you a question before we begin?" Reeves met his gaze, steady and unflinching, unaware that the next words out of Crow's mouth would challenge every assumption he had made about the case and expose a flaw in the investigation that no one else had yet discovered. Than any accusation ever could. Elias Crow noticed it too, the slight tightening of Reeves' jaw, the measured breath, the refusal to rush. After a few seconds, Crow smiled faintly, the kind of smile professors gave when a student almost grasped the point. "Do you know," Crow continued softly, "what separates intelligence from wisdom?" Reeves finally spoke. Confession usually comes after the question. Crow chuckled. "No. Confession comes when a man believes he's been understood." "I'm not there yet." The interrogation room was deliberately bare. No ticking clock. No distractions. Just two men, both convinced the other had underestimated him. Crow leaned forward, his eyes sharp, alert, cataloging every reaction. Reeves let him talk. Smart killers always revealed themselves eventually, not through guilt, but through ego. "You've built a beautiful theory," Crow said. "Interdisciplinary murders. Academic signaling. Psychological superiority. It's elegant, almost flattering." He paused. "But elegance doesn't equal truth." Reeves slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were still photographs of the crime scenes, annotated in precise handwriting. "You're right," Reeves said calmly. "Truth is messier." Crow glanced at the images without touching them. "Then why frame me?" Reeves' eyes narrowed slightly. "I didn't. But you think you did," Crow replied. "And that's what matters." The first crack appeared then, not in Crow, but in the certainty of the room itself. Reeves had expected deflection, arrogance, even provocation. What he hadn't expected was how composed Crow remained, as if the arrest had been an inconvenience rather than a collapse. Crow began to speak again, this time slower. "You see patterns because you need them. Humans are desperate for order. You linked knowledge domains to methods of death, but you ignored something crucial." He tapped the table lightly. "Opportunity." Reeves said nothing, but his mind raced. Opportunity was always considered. It had to be. "Some of the methods you attributed to me," Crow went on, "were accessible to dozens of professionals. Medical technicians, environmental engineers, industrial chemists. You assumed a single mind because it comforted you. One monster is easier than many." That night, Reeves couldn't sleep. Crow's words echoed in his head, not because they were convincing, but because they were dangerous. Doubt was a luxury investigators couldn't afford, yet Reeves had built his career on questioning certainty. He ordered a secondary review of the earlier cases, instructing a separate team to approach them as unrelated deaths. No shared signature. No shared intelligence profile. Just facts. What came back unsettled him. 2 of the deaths had minor inconsistencies Reeves had initially dismissed: timing discrepancies, unreported third-party access points, overlapping personnel logs at facilities near the scenes. Alone, they meant nothing. Together, they whispered something far worse than a single genius killer. Crow, meanwhile, remained in custody, calm to the point of irritation. He requested specific books, asked for legal pads,
spoke politely to guards.
Never once asked about bail or charges. It was as if he were observing an experiment, not living it. On the 5th day, Reeves returned to the interrogation room. "You wanted to ask me a question," Reeves said. Crow's eyes lit up, not with relief, but with interest.
"Yes."
"How certain are you that the smartest person in the room is the one wearing the handcuffs?"
Reeves studied him.
"Certainty isn't required for arrest. Evidence is." Crow nodded slowly. "Then you should examine yours more closely." He slid something across the table, a handwritten list of dates and locations. Reeves recognized them instantly. They were the murder scenes. But next to each was a second set of coordinates. Places Reeves had never connected to the case. "Those," Crow said, "are where I was during each death. Public places. Recorded. Cameras. Receipts. Digital footprints you never bothered to check because your profile was too neat." Reeves didn't react, but his pulse quickened. If Crow was lying, it was a gamble bordering on insanity. If he wasn't, "You're assuming I didn't verify your alibi," Reeves said. Crow smiled. "You verified what you expected to find." Hours later, forensic analysts confirmed it. Crow had been visible, sometimes clearly, during 4 of the 7 murders. Not near the scenes. Not even close. Reeves felt something cold settle in his chest. Either Crow was orchestrating the most elaborate deception of his career, or the case was far more complex than anyone had imagined. The media pressure exploded. Headlines questioned the arrest. Commentators debated whether law enforcement had rushed to judgment. Inside the department, whispers grew louder. Careers were quietly recalculated. Reeves faced a choice: release Crow and risk unleashing a killer, or dig deeper and confront the possibility that Crow was not the hand behind the murders, but the mind behind something else entirely. He chose to dig. Financial records revealed encrypted transactions Crow had never touched directly. Research papers cited anonymously but written in a voice Reeves now recognized. Online forums where advanced techniques were discussed, not taught, but hinted at like riddles. And then, buried deep in server logs, a private group chat with a name that made Reeves' blood run cold. Collective intelligence. It wasn't a cult. It wasn't a gang. It was a network. Highly educated, deeply resentful individuals who believed society wasted brilliance and rewarded mediocrity. Crow hadn't killed anyone. He had designed problems. He had distributed ideas like seeds, letting others prove themselves. When Reeves confronted him, Crow didn't deny it. "I never asked them to kill," Crow said evenly. "I gave them tools. Knowledge.
Choice.
What they did with it speaks more about them than me." "That's murder," Reeves snapped.
Crow tilted his head.
"Is it? Or is it inevitability?" The case shattered into something unrecognizable. Prosecutors hesitated. Defense attorneys circled. And somewhere out there, individuals who had once felt invisible were watching closely, waiting to see if intelligence itself could be put on trial. Reeves understood then that capturing Colorado's smartest killer had never been the real challenge. The real challenge was proving where genius ended and responsibility began. Responsibility was a word the law loved but rarely defined well, and Reeves felt its weight more heavily with each passing hour. Crow sat in a holding cell now, no longer an accused killer in the public eye, but something more elusive, a facilitator, an architect of chaos who had learned how to keep his hands clean. The murders had stopped, yet the danger hadn't. It had simply evolved. Reeves assembled a task force so small it barely existed on paper. Analysts, cyber specialists, behavioral psychologists, people who understood systems more than suspects. He told them one thing only: assume Crow never intended to be free. Assume this arrest was part of the design. That assumption changed everything. They revisited the collective intelligence network, mapping interactions not by usernames, but by escalation. Who asked the sharpest questions? Who received private replies? Who stopped posting right before a murder occurred? Slowly, a pattern surfaced, not of obedience, but of competition. Crow hadn't commanded anyone. He had challenged them. In one recovered message, a user had written, "Theoretically, this would be untraceable." Crow's reply was a single sentence: "Theory is cheap." Reeves stared at that line for a long time. It wasn't encouragement. It was provocation. In custody, Crow requested another meeting. This time, Reeves allowed it without the glass barrier. 2 guards waited outside. Crow looked thinner, paler, but no less composed. "You're hunting them now," Crow said without preamble. Reeves didn't deny it. "You knew we would." "Of course," Crow replied. "Curiosity is your defining weakness." Reeves leaned forward. "You created a game. You don't get to pretend you're surprised by the consequences." Crow's eyes flickered, just for a moment. Games reveal truth. That's all I ever cared about. What truth? Reeves demanded. That brilliance, when ignored long enough, becomes dangerous. Reeves stood abruptly. "You don't get to justify dead bodies with philosophy." Crow's voice remained calm. "Then stop trying to understand me and start understanding them." Over the next weeks, arrests followed quietly. A lab technician in Colorado Springs, a civil engineer in Grand Junction, a graduate student who had dropped out 2 years earlier, bitter and brilliant. None had met Crow in person. None believed they were following orders. Each thought they were proving something, to themselves, to a world that had overlooked them. Yet none of them knew about each other. Crow had isolated them deliberately, feeding each just enough validation to push them past hesitation. The smartest killer wasn't the one who struck the blow. It was the one who never had to. Prosecutors built a new case, one unprecedented in the state. Conspiracy without direct coordination. Criminal liability without explicit instruction. The defense fought viciously, calling it a witch hunt against unconventional thinkers. Public opinion split. Some called Crow evil. Others called him a scapegoat. Reeves testified for hours, explaining the psychology of influence, the architecture of suggestion, the responsibility of knowledge. He watched Crow from the stand. How he listened intently, how he seemed almost proud. Then, during a recess, a junior analyst rushed into the courtroom, pale and shaking. Another death. Different state. Same signature complexity. Same intellectual flourish. Reeves felt the floor tilt beneath him. "That's impossible," someone whispered. Crow closed his eyes slowly, as if savoring a familiar melody. Reeves approached him, voice low. "You said the game was over." Crow opened his eyes. "I said my part was." The realization hit like a physical blow. Collective intelligence hadn't been dismantled, it had evolved. Ideas, once released, didn't need their creator anymore. Others had learned the pattern, improved it, expanded it. Crow hadn't built a network. He had built a methodology. The courtroom descended into chaos. The judge ordered an immediate lockdown. Federal agencies flooded in. Jurisdiction blurred as the threat crossed state lines. Reeves was offered reassignment, a chance to step away from a case that was spiraling beyond control. He refused. Late one night, Reeves sat alone in his office, staring at a wall now bare of photographs. He realized something that terrified him more than any killer ever had. Intelligence couldn't be arrested. It couldn't be imprisoned. It could only be guided or neglected. He returned to Crow one final time. "You didn't want to be free," Reeves said. "You wanted to be remembered." Crow considered that.
"No."
"I wanted to be replicated." Reeves felt a chill. "Then I'll make sure you're forgotten." Crow smiled sadly. "You can't erase an idea once it's proven effective." Reeves leaned closer. "Then I'll change the environment that rewards it." For the first time, Crow looked uncertain. Outside the prison walls, new task forces formed. Universities quietly altered access protocols. Forums vanished overnight. Research ethics came under harsher scrutiny. The system adapted, but slowly, imperfectly. Reeves understood that this case would never truly close. Somewhere, someone intelligent and angry was always listening, always watching, always learning. And as he walked out of the facility under the cold Colorado sky, he wondered not whether they had captured the smartest killer, but whether they had taught the next one how to be even smarter. The final days of the case did not arrive with sirens or dramatic confessions. They arrived quietly, almost respectfully, as if the story itself understood that noise would cheapen what had been revealed. Captain Daniel Reeves stood before a sealed courtroom as the verdict was read, not just for Elias Crow, but for an idea that had haunted the state, the system, and every investigator who had touched the case. Crow was not convicted as a serial killer. The law could not bend that far. Instead, he was found guilty of criminal facilitation, psychological coercion, and intellectual conspiracy on a scale never before prosecuted in Colorado. The sentence was severe. Life behind concrete walls, stripped of platforms, publications, and contact with the outside world. No interviews. No books. No legacy. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Crow rose slowly. "I believed intelligence made us superior," he said evenly. "I was wrong. Intelligence without conscience is just another weapon." It was the closest thing to remorse anyone would ever hear from him. As guards led him away, Crow's eyes met Reeves for the last time.
There was no smile now.
No challenge. Only understanding. Crow finally knew what Reeves had done. He hadn't beaten him intellectually. He had contained him. The public never fully understood the danger they had escaped. News cycles moved on. Headlines faded. But inside law enforcement, the case became a quiet legend, a reminder that the most dangerous predators don't always carry weapons. Sometimes, they carry ideas. Reeves retired 6 months later. Not because he was tired, but because he knew his role in the story was complete. He had spent his life chasing people who broke the law. This case taught him that the next generation of threats would break systems instead. On his last day, he walked through the Major Crimes Unit one final time, past empty desks and corkboards stripped clean. Before leaving, he placed a single note inside his old case file. "Watch the quiet ones." Years passed. Colorado changed its protocols. Universities redefined access. Online spaces grew more cautious, more moderated. But intelligence did not vanish. Ambition did not disappear. Somewhere, young minds still questioned authority, still sought recognition, still wondered how far brilliance could take them. But the difference was this. Now the system was watching. The murders tied to collective intelligence never resumed. Copycats tried and failed. Without Crow's subtle manipulation, without the precise psychological nudges, the illusion of genius collapsed. Those who sought to prove themselves discovered something far more humbling. True intelligence was not destruction, but restraint. Late one evening, long after retirement, Reeves sat alone on his porch, the Rocky Mountains dark against the sky. He thought about the first body, the silence, the absence of chaos. And he realized something that brought him a rare sense of peace. The smartest killer in Colorado had not been captured with handcuffs or force. He had been defeated by patience, by understanding, by refusing to play the game on its creator's terms. Reeves understood now that evil rarely announces itself. It disguises itself as logic, as superiority, as truth. And the only way to stop it is not to outthink it, but to outlast it. Far away, behind reinforced walls and permanent silence, Elias Crow lived the rest of his life without an audience. No debates, no admirers, no minds to sharpen against his own. His greatest fear had come true. Not death, but irrelevance. And that was the real ending of the story. Not the fall of a killer, but the quiet victory of a world that chose responsibility over brilliance, humility over ego, and humanity over the cold seduction of intelligence without soul. Because in the end, The most powerful force was never genius. It was conscience.